You're listening to or watching Private Members Club, and on it rolls again. Hi, I'm JR.
Hi, I'm Matt.
I'm Ian.
And I'm John.
So the Boris Johnson show continues. Do you know what I was looking at today?
The Daily Mail.
No, I certainly wasn't looking at the Daily Mail. Jesus Christ! No, I was just looking. I was looking for some DVDs, and I kept getting flung up. Have I got news for you? Best of the guest presenters. Boris Johnson's face there staring at me from the computer screen as I was trying to shop for something else. But there you go. Right. So
I
not all
think
of
your
us.
internet search history is coming back to haunt you.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah, well, exactly. Quite so. Not all of us were here last week. Only John and I from the four of us that are here now. So we'll dig into that in a minute. In a bit, we'll dig into the whole stuff that we missed last week and the stuff that's been added on top of that this week. Before we get stuck into that, I want to talk about Nadine Dorries just for a minute, because there's been a lot of talk about the situation with her and the sort of peerage that was or wasn't. And actually, all of the facts that have come out point to this really simple chain of events. And yet none of the commentators, and I listened to several different sort of political podcasts, and none of them have talked about this particular thing. So I want to say this thing and get it out and get it off my chest. And then either you can reply to it or we'll move on and talk about Boris. But Boris Johnson clearly promised Nadine Dorries a peerage, a seat in the House of Lords at some point during the past. And whatever it was a year ago, she said that she was going to step down at the next election. And she didn't say why. She didn't give a particular reason why. But it was understood that the reason she'd be standing down from the House of Commons is because she was expected to move on up to the House of Lords instead. So she was resigning her seat so that she'd be able to go to the House of Lords when she came down. What she didn't realise is that you can't be given a seat in the House of Lords if you're still in a seat in the House of Commons. It just can't happen. Even if you're due to step down from the House of Lords, you cannot, from the House of Commons, you cannot be given a seat in the House of Lords until after such time as you have stepped down from the House of Commons. Now, this list of names that Boris Johnson gave went before the committee several weeks ago, and was their job, HOLAC's job, to look through this list of names and see whether they were suitable and whether they were legitimate, whether they actually could go up into the House of Lords. And they looked at this list of names and they gave 8 names back and said, and as far as I'm aware, it might have been all 8 names, but it was certainly several of them. They gave the names back to Sunak, who, being Prime Minister, whose job it was to hand the list of names over. They gave the list of names back to Sunak and said, these 8 people can't be made peers because they're still sitting in the House of Commons, even if they're going to resign at the end of this term. And Sunak, being Sunak, having the war with Johnson as he is, kept that information to himself until the day before Johnson actually resigned, as we'll discover. So on the Friday of a week ago, suddenly, clearly, Nadine Dorries discovers what the situation is, that she can't go up to the Lords if she's still sitting in the House of Commons. So she then resigns with immediate effect her seat in the House of Commons on the expectation that when the list of names is announced, like later on that day, because she's resigned with immediate effect, that means that her reason for not being able to go up to the Lords is now no longer standing. Only the trouble is, of course, her name had already been removed from that list of names, and it's not like they can just slap it back on there. So her name is removed from the list of the names going up to the House of Lords, and she's resigned from the House of Commons. And that was the situation. She suddenly found herself neither in the Commons nor the Lords, and that's why she still hasn't actually tendered her resignation in the Commons, because she doesn't actually have anywhere to go as things stand. Now, it seems to me we've been told all of these things individually that every single thing that I've just said has been revealed as a fact in the situation, and yet nobody's put that line of facts together to understand that that was the situation and how it unravelled, which seems to me quite crazy. So I don't know if anybody wants to add more to that, or whether you want to just go on and talk about Boris Johnson.
Well, certainly I'm going to gloss over your sort of insinuation that the Tories are in any way incompetent or not across all the detail of everything. But where
Or deceiving of each other as well, to be honest.
Or a sort of massive nest of disingenuous lying vipers. But where does this leave Jakey boy? Because that's what Britain really cares about. Where does this leave Jacob Rees-Mogg?
Sir Jacob now, isn't he? Yeah,
he's knighted, so he's not a peer.
Okay.
He's a knight,
Good.
So he can be knighted while he's still in the Commons.
And then they can make him appear very soon thereafter. I won't be happy until he's on the back of all your currency. In a GIMP costume.
What else would you wear?
Digital currency. Every transaction comes with a...
I mean, the other thing is Nadine Dorries doesn't have a career without Boris Johnson as Prime Minister or in politics. There's no point. She was always going to resign at some point, whether it's in the middle or at the end. And part of all of these resignations, the significance of these resignations is they can make much more money by resigning, not having to go to the House of Commons, go to America, where they're more gratefully received because Americans are more extreme in their politics, so they can go on the speaking circuit in America.
Well, and they can do sort of double the length shows on GB News. I don't know
and
if that's,
GB News,
if that's now become
TV,
like the second or third most popular channel in the UK now, but that must be coining in a bit of bunts.
Yeah.
GB News, who keep saying,
right-wing
no, we're not a news channel, and then keep comparing themselves to the other news channels.
Yeah, and there's obviously the newspaper columns as well, or the chicken feeders, I believe they were once described by Alexander de Pfeffel.
Well, and his first column is about
why his diet
slimming drugs or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you get the feeling this is maybe one from his top drawer that's been sitting around for a while? Because if he'd written it in the last week or so, it would be topical, I feel.
I get the impression it's something he's just discovered ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Give me 600 words on any old shit.
So he's typed in, 600 words, spaff, whiff, waff, waffle, get Brexit done. I got all the big calls right. And it's just spat out 600 words on why slimming pills don't work if you're a fat, lazy tosser who jogs for 20 seconds a day.
Yes, that's fundamentally it.
I just typed into ChatGPT, write a Boris Johnson column, and ChatGPT looked back at him and said, fat bastard, slimming.
Take jogging photos.
Boris Johnson, then. I mean, the report came out a couple of days ago, and there seems to have been a certain amount of surprise at just how far it went. I don't really feel remotely surprised at how far it went, because it was clear from the start that he had lied. It was also clear that there was evidence. I mean, there is an occasion where somebody says to him as he enters the House of, as he enters the chamber of the House of Commons, don't say that the advice was followed, because it wasn't. And he walks into the chamber and they say to him, was the advice followed? And he says, yes, he knew he wasn't supposed to say that because somebody told him, one of his advisors, on the way into the room, not to say that, and yet he still did. And that's on the record. And so it was clear from the start that he lied, that he continued to lie, that he covered up his lies by telling more lies. And all of this was on the record before this inquiry even began. So I'm not really surprised. I'm pleased that they haven't ducked out of any of this stuff and hidden, that they've actually published this stuff and, basically given him the opprobrium he deserves. But I'm not really surprised, because all of this stuff was on the record. It's not like we didn't know about all of this stuff. Matt, we've not seen you for a few weeks because you've been on holiday. So, but I mean, Boris Johnson's got to be one of your favourite subjects. So how has the past week to 10 days unravelled for you, Matt?
Well, as you say, it's not very surprising. The general outcome of the inquiry. The level of the penalty that would have been imposed if Johnson hadn't jumped first, that's quite surprising because it's 90 days rather than 10 days. But that's nothing to do with the inquiry. That's to do with Johnson basically calling the inquiry a kangaroo court and criticising and bringing it blah blah.
It would have been like 10 or 30 days if he hadn't have done that.
Yeah, so yeah, something like 10, I think, just enough to cause a by-election. I think that's the 90 days doesn't mean that much because A, he's already gone, and B, he's already gone. So yeah, I mean, it's fine. I think my view that Boris Johnson doesn't have a political career that was formed when he resigned first time as Prime Minister is kind of continuing. I still don't. I don't think
you're
saying,
sticking by that.
Yeah, he keeps saying I will come back or I'm going for now, but he's not going to come back. I don't think. I mean, I think it's quite clear that he's not Freddy Krueger. He's not got like endless sequels. And like Nadine Dorries, he can make far more money by writing really shit books about Churchill and Shakespeare than he can being Prime Minister or an MP. And he's committed to a big house 30 miles away from here, which he has to obviously, pay the loan out on. So, and he's got about 20 kids that he has to get through Eton or Fets or wherever, and then Oxford.
There's some question, isn't there? And I say this advisedly because there's no question at all, but there was a joke that one of the people who is on the list of people who were going to be sent out to the House of Lords must be one of Boris Johnson's illegitimate kids because they're too young and too inexperienced to be going up to the House of Lords for any other reason.
And they look
a bit of a reason.
They look a bit like Boris Johnson as well, to be fair.
Charlotte Owen are we talking about here?
They're not
29 years old.
I mean, it's a Harry Hewitt situation if you're talking about possible parentage.
Having said that, like I say, I listen to quite a few political podcasts and they've had quite a few interviewees, including people who've worked closely with Boris Johnson. And to be fair, these people who work closely with Boris Johnson say, A, he's not interested in the money, and B, one of them predicted he'd be happy as leader of the opposition throwing brickbats at a Labour government. I mean, I wouldn't predict it, but
he'd be happy throwing brickbats. He wouldn't be happy turning up every week.
But he wouldn't. It's hard work. We know what Boris Johnson is. Yeah. He'd be leader of the opposition and he'd be editor of the Telegraph and he'd be writing a column for the Daily Mail. He'd be doing all of those things at once.
But on the subject of him staging a comeback or not, and I think we all, hope that he's not going to come back like Freddy Krueger. But all it takes is for the Tories to be absolutely decimated at the next election, and say there's only 50 of them left, and they look around like headless sheep for anyone who could lead them. Bang, he's back, and we could be talking about 6 months' time.
But he's not that.
Well, I was just going to say on that point, the big problem that we as a country might have is that at the next general election, if the Tories are absolutely wiped out, the ones who remain will be the ones further to the right wing, and the chances are the ones who will be putting themselves forward for the major positions will be the Suella Bravermans of this world. And so actually, if your sort of slightly more moderate Tories are gone or disappeared, I mean, I'm not saying I think it will happen, and I certainly hope it doesn't, but that again would strike you as the perfect time for Boris Johnson to have his revocation of his parliamentary pass undone and for him to turn up picking up a seat in a by-election, as there'll be quite plenty of those, no doubt. And who knows? I wouldn't predict.
But I think there's a general mistake because we're told by Jacob Rees-Mogg and certain brand of Tory that Boris Johnson is phenomenally popular and he can win landslides at elections. But I don't think he is phenomenally popular, and I don't think the far right of the Conservative Party is phenomenally popular. I think the moderate bit of the Conservative Party is still popular. I think there's a difference between being pro-Brexit and pro-right wing. That's just it. And so you take Brexit out of the equation, and I'm not sure. So Johnson stands a good chance if he could run again in his own constituency, he stands a good chance of losing. Which
in
is
his
one
own
of the
constituency, yeah,
one,
which
one
is
of the
wild
conspiracy.
move.
One of the conspiracy theories was Nadine Dorries and this other guy fell on their swords to give him an alternative constituency to run in, but I don't think that's likely.
Well, it's a 24,000. Dorries is 24,000 majority, and they're scared they're going to lose that.
Yeah,
because it's her, I would think, is a big part of that equation, because she's proved herself very unpopular. Even when she was in the middle of resigning with immediate effect, I don't know quite what she thinks the word immediate means, but even in the middle of that, she then said, and this was such a telling quote, she said that her office was continuing to do the good work that her office had been doing for her constituents. There was nothing in any of her statement that indicated that she herself in person had been doing any work for her constituents whatsoever. And so I think that's part of the reason why that 24,000 majority might disappear, because clearly most of her constituents probably have little idea that she's actually their MP at all.
They also probably associate her with Boris Johnson, who isn't that popular. He's not like a god-given.
No, there's Rob Ford did some work on this.
He has popularity in certain areas, but it's not like. Sorry, John.
Rob Ford, he did some work on it with stats this week. He went, he isn't that popular. It's just
no. Here's the thing.
That's what I said.
Yes.
Okay, but let's dig into that a little bit, because at the last general election, the Tories' vote went up by 1.2%, but they won a landslide majority of seats. Now, you don't win a landslide majority of seats if your vote goes up by 1.2% in every constituency, because in most constituencies, that just means that the margin slims a bit rather than the margin gets overturned. So what has actually happened at the last general election is that the Tory vote has shrunk, but the Labour vote has shrunk further. And in the seats that Johnson won, the Johnson vote has overtaken both the Tory vote and the Labour vote. So when you say that Johnson's not popular, what you mean is overall the popularity of Johnson might be 30%, say, or 20% or something. But if you narrow that down into different demographics, what you're actually talking about is he's probably very unpopular in certain demographics, and in other demographics, he's really popular. But when it comes to election, you only have to nail the demographics where you're popular, and actually that can take you over the line.
What I mean is, if you substitute the Boris vote for the Brexit vote, because I think Boris Johnson, it helped that he was a recognisable figure at the time, but people associated him with Brexit, and they were voting, and the vote increased in those areas. The Brexit vote increased in the election in those areas which went for Brexit during the referendum. And I think now Brexit isn't a key issue. That's why Boris Johnson, when he resigns, says this is all a conspiracy by people trying to undo Brexit, because they're desperately trying to sort of, bring that up, because it's the only winning thing for the Tories.
But again, you're making that into a very binary thing when it's not as binary as that, is it? Because the reason people voted for Brexit wasn't just a black and white Brexit, not Brexit. The reason people voted for Brexit, there were various reasons. I mean, we can talk bigotry or whatever, but a large part of the reason why people voted for Brexit was just because of the way that social media and certain people on the right of politics in this country have used social media to turn division into a national pastime. And so it's not about Brexit or not Brexit, it's about division. And if you're on one side of the division marker, then you can, if you're the popular person on one side of the division marker, even if that shrinks, it's still there. And so yeah, I kind of agree that Boris Johnson in and of himself is not necessarily popular, but I also do think that he is very, very popular amongst a certain type of people.
Well, what those figures prove is that he was very popular in the 2019 election. I mean, he's now had 3 years to defecate all over himself, and hopefully he would attract slightly less success were he to run again right now.
Yeah, I mean, but so Boris Johnson's one success is getting Brexit done. Then I say success in sort of inverted, rabbit ears, because he didn't.
He got the admin bit of it done. Yes,
but I think perception by the perception of people who are pro Brexit, Boris Johnson got Brexit done. But that's a one-shot thing. He can only do that once, and the rest of the stuff he did, apart from vaccines, according to Johnson, vaccines was his big success, and maybe building 30 more hospitals, again, not really, but that's what he claims.
40?
He hasn't got anything really to point to.
What he would point to when you say that all he could say is that he got Brexit done once, he would say that Churchill only won the Second World War once.
Well, yes.
I think the issue is, though, is not that he got Brexit done or not, but I think a lot of the people who voted for Brexit and still think Brexit should be done and kept and done the right way, their way. I think the problem is a lot of those people are now being pushed by newspapers like the Daily Mail and the Daily Express and politicians like Farage and Rees-Mogg and all the others into thinking that if you don't get Boris back, or somebody on Boris's side of the party back, then Brexit will get undone. So I don't think you can rule Brexit out of the next general election.
Not entirely, but I think the success of that would be analogous to the success that Corbyn had in saying the Tories are going to try and destroy the NHS, which did dent the Tories in the 2019 election, but it didn't really make that much headway because it sounds like a conspiracy theory.
Well,
and also Starmer's not saying.
Starmer's deliberately neutralised the issue.
Yeah.
Well, he's trying to neutralise the issue, but the trouble is you've got all these other people getting shared all over social media who are neutralising it, aren't they? And that's why Starmer keeps getting asked about it. He should be neutral, but he keeps getting asked. Do you know what I mean?
And that's certainly going to have an impact, but it's not going to have the same impact as it had in 2019, before a deal had been made, before because that was forced on by Theresa May, getting the kind of wishy-washy, in inverted rabbit ears deal.
The thing is, Brexit has become a more and more unpopular thing because people are seeing the consequences of Brexit now. Yeah. So it's a far less popular issue than it was back then. So I don't think it'll play that much of a role. Labour will get away because they're not associated with it.
Yeah, I think the Tories are gradually discovering that Boris Johnson isn't an election winner, and that's why his support amongst MPs is kind of dwindling to people who are quitting immediately, or those who Boris Johnson have knighted.
The Parliamentary Party have discovered this, but I don't think necessarily the Tory rank and file, and certainly not the country as a whole.
So but
the Tory rank and file voted for Liz Truss. Yeah, for God's sake.
Yeah. So there are three
exactly. So why would those exact same people would vote Boris back?
Yep. So there are three layers that we're talking about. We're talking about the MPs who have gone off Boris Johnson completely, obviously, because they were the ones that kicked him out. There's the Tory party membership, which isn't a huge number. That's not the main electorate.
Somewhere around 200,000-ish.
Yeah. So it's insignificant in electoral terms. They're still very kind of pro Johnson and pro Truss. So they're bonkers. And then there's the electorate itself. And I think the mistake the things that the MPs have discovered is the electorate aren't really that keen on Boris Johnson, even if their membership is. So they've gone to the electorate because they're starting to think about a general election rather than a leadership election or anything like that.
Well, I'd love to believe it's the case that the country doesn't like Boris Johnson anymore, but I really don't think it's true. I mean, the country
he's unpopular. He's one of the most unpopular leaders since leaving office. Yeah. He is deeply unpopular.
And not Polish people, I mean, like opinion polls.
But like I say,
because Poles don't like Boris Johnson either because of Brexit. All comes back to Brexit.
I suspect Boris, if he wanted to be a popular figure again, he'll achieve that faster by staying out of politics and going back on the writing circuit, being a columnist, trying to get back on Have I Got News for You? And within 5 years, most of the voters in the UK have forgotten he was ever Prime Minister.
Yeah, it's like,
if he tries to get back in, then...
Like Portillo, he should go off and do a travel program on a nice train or go on holiday and film it.
Yeah.
And he'll be fine. It will like neutralize his personality. Like Anne Widdecombe did briefly writing romances before she turned into a... Or she disinterred her nut job stuff.
On the question of polls, how far behind Labour are the Tories?
Is it? I think the Tories are down somewhere around generally 25, 26%. Labour are low mid 40s.
So somewhere approaching 20%.
I think that's coming down to the Tory baseline.
But here's the other question.
Yeah.
But here's the other question. How far behind Starmer is Sunak? He's not. They're basically neck and neck. And
because
here's
they're both
something
they're both seen as administrators.
And here's something that was pointed out after the last general election and a couple before that. The exit polls, which proved to be correct, were actually far closer to the percentages that the leaders were getting than the percentages that the parties were getting. In other words, the next general election is probably going to be a lot closer than a simple reading of Labour versus Tory would have you believe. Now, the reason I bring
you wait for election campaign, you watch how they play Sunak's wealth up.
Well, Sunak will be fine because he can just tell the BBC to only say what he says, and then they'll win. So we can all go home.
But also, I'm not surprised in the last election. I'm not surprised that's the case because Boris Johnson symbolised the very thing.
Not just in the last general election. This is found to be a truism over the last few times when they've been able to measure it.
Okay.
So, but the point I'm making is we can't just rely on simple polls. You know, you have to take context and other things like that into account.
But there's a simple question on the parties, which you can ask at election, which tends to be really good guideline, which is, do you feel better off than when you elected these guys? And
well, I mean,
that's been
a question you could ask for the last 3 general elections, and they still voted them back in.
Yeah,
but 5 years of austerity. Let's get the Tories back and let's ditch the Liberals. Another 4 years of austerity.
You can blame the Tories back. The Liberals took the blame for.
You can't blame the Liberals for the Theresa May and Boris Johnson elections.
They collapsed. The Liberal vote collapsing is a big part of the last 3 general elections.
And the problem with the David Cameron stuff is the country was doing quite well by the end of the David Cameron years. That's sort of, I think, the second David Cameron election when he actually won in a majority. We were actually doing quite well in the economy, but now we're obviously doing abysmally.
It's going to be interesting to see how the COVID inquiry goes this week because Cameron and Osborne are up before it. So I'll be interested to see how that comes in and if it links in austerity to the lack of preparedness with COVID. Because if it joins some dots, that's going to be interesting.
And again,
pre-material.
And again, just as Johnson was synonymous with Brexit, Sunak rests a lot of his success on the COVID and the reaction to COVID.
He takes a help out as well.
Yes, yeah. And also his initial like giving us all money. That's when
didn't give me any.
I mean, well, yeah.
We'll see. I mean, the case that I've been making is not that Boris Johnson will be back. The case I'm making is I don't think things are as black and white as that. He's gone and it's over.
Yeah. They're never black and white, and I don't think it's going to be a massive landslide for Labour at the next election.
No,
and I think
there is the SNP is going to have an effect too, right?
Well, there's a poll on that tonight. Yeah, there's a poll on that. I think Labour up to 30 odd in Scotland and SNP down 17 or something like that.
Which is unsurprising because they keep getting arrested. That's always unfortunate when you're.
They do seem to have a lot of naughty leaders, don't they, as a party?
Yeah.
I think, and I could be wrong, but I think the appetite for independence up there seems to have slipped a bit since Brexit. So
I don't know that it has. I think the goal has just receded from anyone's reach now. because of Sunak and his you can't have another referendum.
And I think for a party to campaign on independence, whether it's Scottish independence or Brexit, I think the party leader needs to have charisma, because the party leader needs to come across as a national leader. Plus, as sort of a symbol of independence. And I think if they don't have charisma, then obviously that dents their vote immediately.
I think as well,
there's that sort of one shot.
Was it 2013, the Scottish independence referendum, something around there?
Yes.
That's a decade they've been campaigning on independence, and they're nowhere near delivering it. People start asking questions at this point,
Well, that's it. They had that. Yeah.
They have what? How can they do it? All they can do is ask number 10, and number 10 says no.
Yeah.
So there's no mechanism
unless they're successful enough to force a coalition with Labour in the next election, if it's so close. But I don't think that would happen, because
even if that was the only way.
Is a nasty word.
Yeah, even if that was the only way for Starmer to get into number 10, I still don't think he's going to offer them a referendum.
No,
because it's massively unpopular.
I think it'd go confidence and supply, to be honest, at the moment.
I always thought that was a pop album from the 80s.
Yeah, 12-inch remixes, ABC or something like that.
Heaven 12. Yeah. Is there more that anybody wants to add? We seem to have skipped over the facts, but I mean, anybody can read the news and see what the facts are.
I saw a thing this morning where Boris Johnson, again in a masterstroke of preemptive activity, has said to all the MPs, "Oh, it's all right. Don't stand up for me on Monday. Just vote against me."
No, what he said is, "Don't stand up for me on Monday," because if nobody says, what happens on Monday is they ask the chamber, "Is there anybody here who disagrees with this piece of legislation?" And if nobody says no, they don't disagree with the piece of legislation, there is no vote. So if nobody stands up for Johnson, he doesn't lose a vote because there isn't one. So that's what he's doing. He's trying to sidestep any vote at all.
That's always been his trick for going, "I won every election I stand in, apart from 1997. Yeah. Because he just quits ahead of time. I think the really striking thing this week is that they were issuing threats to people for voting for this report, but the only people you see talking are the actual Johnson loyalists, the ones who've got the peerages. So his support base, I think, is really tiny. And you come to the kind of end of a point where he's been bigged up by the Tory media, and they're basically having a conversation with the Conservative Party. So they're looking in a mirror and talking to each other. It's like two people shouting at each other and confirming the other's views.
I tell you what would be more interesting, because there's maybe about 15 people now who are behind Boris in the House of Commons,
if that.
But what would be more interesting? Yeah, you're right. It might be down to less than 10, but I mean, it's hard to say really. Without that vote on Monday, it's impossible to say just how much support he really has. But it's small.
I think that's another reason for that, because he doesn't want to expose that.
Well, exactly. But the point I was going to make was, those are the parliamentarians. What would have been interesting would have been if there had been a vote of no confidence in one of the constituencies, and that would have let you see how much support there is for Boris Johnson amongst the constituents in that constituency, rather than amongst the actual parliamentarians, because I think those are two entirely different equations, and so we're not going to probably get to see that either. But that would have been more indicative. I mean, certainly you hope. Yeah, well, no, it wasn't going to be a by-election, because what they were talking about was that
it would have been if he had the petition.
No, what they were talking about was that the people who voted against Johnson were going to be put up for deselection in their constituencies. So there were going to be votes amongst the constituents for whether or not they wanted the deselection. That's what they were talking about.
Not the constituents, the local party members.
The party members, I guess it would be.
Yeah. Do you remember that story that Javier Bardem tells in Spyfall about there's a dustbin full of rats and he trains them just to eat each other until they're all gone? I don't know why, but there's something about the Tory in
Yes.
There's
Skyfall.
something about the Tory party right
Not
now that
Skyfall.
really reminds me of that. It's real end of days stuff. Deselecting each other for, oh, God.
I know. They hate each other more than they hate the Labour Party, which is just bizarre, but true.
I mean, the part is they see themselves as cynic dosh for the country, you know.
But I do find it
so they
frightening.
think these court intrigues are the vital thing.
Well, absolutely. They think it's.
I mean, again, it's an American playbook, because the more division there is in American politics, the more Trump gets into trouble, the more people fight against Trump, even within his own party. He makes millions of dollars from people just donating. People just give him money when he gets arrested.
And he found his support as well. It's not like his support disappears. His support might dwindle, but also his support might dwindle by 20% on one side, but then it comes back by 10% of new people on the other side. The thing is, the support never disappears. It rallies. It might dwindle a bit, but then it rallies again. And, you know, Johnson is not Trump and Britain is not America, but the parallels are impossible to ignore. And I hope Johnson's gone, and I'd really like to believe Johnson's gone, but nothing about what's happening. With the fact that we sat down to talk for 20 minutes about Boris Johnson, and we're already approaching 40 minutes. We can't stop talking about him. We can't stop making him the center of attention, and that's true of every political journalist in the country. It's true of every newspaper in the country, and if political journalists are talking about it and newspapers are talking about it, then just people, the general public, are reading about it.
It's because Sunak and Starmer are dull as ditch water, which
is great,
true, if that's what you want. But
if we had to rely on them to become the national hate figures, could we do it? Could you enthusiastically get this worked up about Rishi Sunak? I mean,
he's quite small.
He's like a little shrill sixth former. I wouldn't dignify him by being cross with him.
He's tediously ineffectual. He's got to go.
Yeah,
he will. I don't think he's got. You need a charismatic leader of some kind, or someone with a purpose to change it around. And I don't see Sunak doing that. He's not that type to suddenly go, actually.
Yeah. I think we need fabricant. There's nothing else for it.
Do you see Starmer as doing that on the other side of the floor? Because
he's just seen as competent.
Yeah, I don't
that's
think
all he needs to be.
Starmer doesn't need what Sunak needs. There's a difference between attack and defense. So Sunak's vulnerable and he doesn't have the charisma to basically dig himself out of the ditch. Starmer just needs to be competent, stable, not chaotic, because that's also all Labour's ever needed to do, really. Because Labour's always been seen as the kind of the left-wing Trotskyites kind of agents of chaos. And also, the more competent they can be, the better.
There's 3 or 4 people I can think of straight away behind Starmer who could take over and probably be a better leader than he will be. I don't know that that's true of the Tory cabinet. I can't think of.
Oh yes, no,
because Johnson sacked them all, and they.
Yeah, no. Well, yes. Johnson appointed them in the first place as yes men. He appointed them because he didn't want anyone who would be able to take over from him.
So all the credible Tories are gone. Whereas you've got Annalise Dodds, you've got Rachel Reeves, you've got,
probably the most credible Tory in sort of cabinet at the moment. I go back to this. Is probably Jeremy Hunt, like it or not.
That's why you appointed him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
because he's seen that way, even though he's frankly not.
And if anything tells you where Britain's reached as a country, it's the fact that Jeremy Hunt is now.
True. Wow. My worry is when it comes to a general election, when Keir Starmer has to be Mr. Charisma for he does. He does.
Not right now.
At a general election, he does. And
against Sunak isn't going to be either. Let's not look at that.
That's if Sunak makes it. There's still like 16 months to go.
Think back to 97. Would Labour have had a landslide if they'd been led by Gordon Brown or Jack Straw or Robin Cook?
See, that's not as easy to answer as you think, is it?
And Starmer's not that bad. I think he does have charisma. No. He's not Ian Duncan Smith, who's basically like quiet and try to make a case for why a quiet man is
quiet good. Man is shouting or whatever it was.
Yeah,
Jesus.
That really was uncharismatic. Whereas Starmer, if you look at him in Prime Minister's questions, he gets the right questions. He kind of, is a little bit chess playing in Prime Minister's questions, but he also lands punches. So yeah, in a debate, I think he'd do well.
We'll see. Well, clearly we all hope so, right?
It's a lawyer, and Sunak hasn't got the debating society tricks that Johnson had.
He's got nothing, has he?
No. I mean, you said Boris Johnson, David Cameron, Oxford Union Debating Society. Just ignore the opposition's point, stick a joke in. Everyone likes you. You win the debate. Sunak doesn't do that. He actually wants to win the arguments.
The thing with Sunak, all he's got to do is stand up and say, "I don't have to do this. I do this because I'm trying to,
All he has to do is stand on the box so he can go to the lectern and
jump up and down and go, I don't need to do this,
There was a brilliant moment this week with Sunak, which showed exactly how incompetent he actually is, despite the fact that he might look more competent. When a journalist asked him, in the midst of all these sort of questions about the honours system and everything else that was going on at the start of the week, said to him, why is your government being derailed by all these questions about this? Why aren't you concentrating on the things you should be concentrating on? And instead of saying we are concentrating on the things we should be concentrating on, he said, because he's allowed to do this. And it's like, no, Rishi, that's not the answer you were supposed to give.
That's saying the quiet part out loud, isn't it?
That's really, really stupid answer to a really easy question. And it just kind of shows that Rishi Sunak is not the man for that job. But, right, is there anything more, or shall we knock this on the head?
Are we giving them a score out of 10?
Yeah, I want to give it a score.
Well, last week we did score Boris Johnson's prime ministership. So I don't know, Ian and Matt, do you want to give a score to Boris Johnson's prime ministership? I didn't write it down.
90 days.
Matt. We just gave him a plain 0. I gave him a 0. Oh. John gave him a 0. Simon gave him a 0.
I was trying to give him a minus, but yeah.
I'd give him, I think thinking objectively.
Oh my God, man, we weren't being objective. It was a joke. Okay. We did a little joke at the end where we gave him a score.
He was quite good with Ukraine. Maybe 1. 1 for Ukraine, and that's it.
I'm not sure anybody else would have done anything different with the Ukraine.
That's 5, so I think he's averaging 0.2.
No, Ian gave him 90, so he's actually averaging 17.5 out of 10.
He gave him 90 days.
I think.
Behind bars.
Right, until we do this again, which no doubt we will. We'll come back every week now and review Boris Johnson's column in the Mail, won't we?
Oh, lovely.
Maybe not. I was JR.
I was Matt.
I was Ian.
And I was John.
And we will speak again soon.